cycling home from school to 144 Seacliff Road, Bangor, County Down, the house we rented during the last year of World War II, my eye lit upon a yellow poster with red and black lettering that announced 3 plays by the renowned Dublin Gate Theatre, Where Stars Walk, 100 Years Old, and Othello. I'd never seen a play. My mother consulted my granny, who said the Gate was known for modern plays that were not quite polite. They decided it would be safer to pick the Shakespeare. And so, in my 11th year, I had my first encounter with jealousy on a grand scale, drunkenness, fornication, and murder. These elements were of little consequence to me. What held my fascinated attention for 3 hours in the pitch pine and white-tiled interior of the Dufferin and Ava Memorial Church Hall was how the stage dimmed when a scene was over and the actors drew gauze curtains, painted to look like old tapestries. The stage was aglow with colourful dresses and smart uniforms. In the interval, my mother read from the programme that the design was inspired by the 16th century Venetian artist Carpaccio. Would I have been surprised to learn that within a decade I'd be appearing with the same actors in the same play?
Well, we met in Trinity College, Dublin, as students, although I was a year ahead of himself.
I can't remember an exact moment of meeting, but you were always there, I think, in the Dublin University Players, and also singing with the choral society and singing solos with them.
I think we actually met in Players.
Yeah, we used to do lunchtime plays, isn't that right?
Yes, some of those.
And I was in a terrible production of Twelfth Night. Did you see that?
I did see that, and it was terrible. We were born on the same day. I think Christopher was born a little ahead of me. I was born apparently at tea time. He was born in the morning. So he has always dominated things from that point of view.
I was born at 2:10 in the morning at 32 College Gardens, Belfast. It was the home of my maternal grandfather. He was a Dr. Killen. He was a head of the Ben Hospital. And I was born in Belfast because my mother was there, of course, and my father was in India in the British service.
And I was born miles away in London, in Greenwich, where we lived, very near the date line at Greenwich. Mine was at school, yes, and we did the whole play in a very simple manner. And I had a wonderful costume, a sort of hussar costume with braids across the front. Unfortunately, it was white, and I was at the fat stage, and it was not very prepossessing. However, I decided I would add to my panache by having a moustache, because I was playing Sergius Soranov, a very dashing character.
Well, at the same time, possibly within weeks, I was appearing in a production of the same play, Arms and the Man, at St. Columba's College in Dublin, and I was sustained the role of Catherine Petkoff, and I was wearing a dress of the wrong period. And what I remember most about it was my annoyance, and actually that of the other members of the cast, because the chief part, Captain Blunchley was played by the teacher who was in charge of drama, and he had nabbed this part that could have been a lovely introduction to a young student to do. And I was very annoyed by this. And especially as I was playing opposite him, he was a gentleman of about 45, I suppose, and I, at the age of 16, was appearing as his future mother-in-law.
The arrival at Dunleary was memorable. In the dawn light, the soft breeze wafted the strange smell of turf smoke from the shore. I took the train into Dublin and took a taxi from there to my prearranged digs in Willbrook Road, Rathfarnham. I noticed that Ireland was not England. There were a number of differences. For instance, the pillar boxes, which were green, were very few and far between, and yet the bus stops were very close together.
The memory I have of Dunleary was, I suppose, about a year after I'd graduated from Trinity. I was working in the theatre when I could get work, which was not very often. One might be paid 10 shillings a week, one mightn't be paid at all, or just given a box of chocolates at the end of the run. And I thought, I have to get out of here. And I was advised that Canada was the place because television was starting and people were needed for all branches of work in the television studio, including acting. And I decided to go to Canada. And my parents required me to have a job. And I got a job as a school teacher. I'd no training at all in teaching, but this was really to placate them. I had no intention of taking a job in a school. So I went to Dunleary, and I suppose in hindsight, they saw me off, of course. They must have thought, what is happening? We've looked after him and paid for his education, and when he's educated, he vanishes. But I didn't have those thoughts, nor did I have the typical immigrant's thoughts of leaving the Green Isle and all that. It was all an adventure.
Indeed, I was working on This Is Your Life, and we met all sorts of very interesting people, not necessarily famous, but some of them were. But I think the one that impressed me and that I've remembered the best is the Black American singer Paul Robeson, who was an extraordinary character. He was very old at this stage. He was well into his 80s, at least as old as I am. He had a little wife with him, and he behaved completely, quietly, calmly, no star business, didn't expect to be treated any different from anyone else, and spoke very well. At the end of the program, it was my job as production secretary to escort them down to their taxi in the television centre in London. And unusually, the producer of the program and the director of the program, two middle-aged men, came with me to escort them down, and we saw them into their taxi. And as we went back up in the lift, the two men looked at each other and said, "Phew." And I knew then that they had been as impressed as I was by the personality of this extraordinary man. We both felt that we had been hit by a rainbow. I have for a long time been a singer, though I'm not now, but I realized it was not going to be a full-time career. I wasn't good enough to be a full-time singer. So it was always part-time, and I was always rushing off to find a studio in radio in my lunch hour to do half an hour's practice, this sort of thing. But mainly I was directing television music programs. There has never been a music department in television. There is, of course, in the radio section of RTE, but I was televising, directing the orchestras and recitals with soloists of all kinds, some visiting people, some locals. There were music competitions. There was the RTE proms, which I was in charge of for the television side of it for a year or two. And also I directed the 5 operas which were put on as part of the proms. So music programs were the dominant part of my career in RTE, though one was liable to be snatched away and put onto something else where they suddenly needed a director, which might be something I knew nothing about, like maths for schools, for instance, I did.
That was the most terrifying night of my life. I joined what was called Téléfiche and then. I had some experience from Canada. I had been selected to join the new television station and was given some training in studio production. Was sent for a week to ITN in London and also to the BBC News Department. So I had a sort of notion about how news was put on air. My job was to look after the studio, see that film was properly edited in time for the evening bulletin, and the graphics were ready and all that. But I also had to do the vision mixing. And if I'm near a machine, I will go wrong or it will go wrong. The vision mixing was pressing the right buttons for the right cue, for the right film to come up, and for the music to happen and all that. And in the midst of all this, I pressed a wrong button, and a huge 6 appeared on the screen for viewers to see. And I was shattered. And I quickly pressed the next button, and the film came on correctly. And I thought, tomorrow I will be sacked. The 6 was the second count to go 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 that you always had before the film came up. And I had let the viewers see this 6, which was absolutely the wrong thing. And I didn't go to the opening night party because I was so ashamed. And next day, I found that people viewing at home hadn't noticed it. Quite extraordinary. And only 2 people in Téléfiche noticed it, and they were old hats at this kind of thing. Oh yes, and the most important was Archbishop McQuaid, who came in to give benediction of the Blessed Sacrament. And he was attended by the Director General, the Controller of Programs, the Head of Presentation, several members of the studio staff, and a whole lot of priests and nuns. And they came down the corridor, and the studio crew, one by one, fell on their knees and kissed the Archbishop's ring. And I, when the hand was held out to me, I shook it warmly and welcomed him to the studio. I think he was a bit taken aback.
Well, I was at a party because I was one of the few people that had no duties on the first night, and I was literally at a party at Sheila Richards' house where we watched the opening night, and I saw the 6. I wrote to my parents to describe this incident. The Chief Justice of Northern Ireland was related through his wife to Christopher's mother. So that was why they came to tea, though they lived in the north, but they came to tea in the south. And I wrote like this: rings were donned and cakes were made and all that. And then Vanessa, who has met him once when we went to lunch, behaved unusually familiarly And when he walked in the door, she looked him straight in the eye and said, "I've seen you before," in a bold manner worthy of the most confirmed criminal in the dock. She kept poking his bald head and trying to turn somersaults over him on the sofa, which was not at all the thing to do to a man in his position. But he didn't seem to mind a bit.
Oh yes, Cassie Burke was my creation. She was a dire provincial lady who dabbled in the arts, and she would do things like adjudicate at a fish, that sort of thing. She always had to be in the local paper discussing matters of literature and the arts and music and things like that. She absolutely knew nothing about anything, but she was very friendly with the local TD. And this character that I presented, the scene was always, for instance, a table set up in a field at an éireacht with a little placard saying, "Tír agus teanga." And people were sitting around and listening to Miss Cassie Burke displaying her interest and love of music and the arts. And I addressed the theatre audience as if they were the audience at this wonderful provincial do. And I didn't discover till some years later that this hadn't been done before on the stage in Dublin. Jimmy O'Dea, for example, had someone come in to see one of our student reviews, and very soon he was addressing the Gaiety Theatre audience as if they were the audience at a place called Barry-Go Backwards. But mine was much more realistic. It wasn't Barry-Go Backwards. It was called Ballydevy, and it was satiric, but meant to be realistic, not meant to be farcical. Ballylennon, yes, Ballylennon was also, in my mind, a real place. And this was a radio series about events in this small town in Ulster, but in the Free State. And that had to be very subtly suggested. When the BBC were interested in it, they said, it can't be Monaghan, because I had set it in Monaghan where I had family connections. They said, people in the UK, your listeners, will think that Monaghan is a made-up place, and in fact you're hoping to make this seem very real. Why don't you set it in Donegal? So I set it in Donegal, and it went on for 6 shows, and then another 6 shows, and then they said, another please, and I said, I couldn't dredge up another 6 stories about this place, but of course I did. And it was extremely popular, and it goes on being popular and is repeated all the time, which is extraordinary to me. I discovered that I had a great interest, which stays with me, in the relationship between the natural landscape and the urban landscape in Ireland. And not many people were interested in this in the 1960s or 70s. And I was commissioned by RTE to write and direct a series of films that showed where we come from, what we've done to a landscape, and how towns have grown up. And they had titles like Railway and Canal Architecture, A Provincial Town and Its Traffic Problems, these sort of things. And it was immensely popular, and everyone was very surprised, because people weren't doing that sort of thing. And I spent, I think, nearly 6 months writing and shooting it, with great help from architects and environmentalists, though that word wasn't used at that time. And it has been repeated. And that led me on to become a judge in the Tidy Towns competition, and I've judged that in every county, except Dublin. You aren't allowed to judge in the county that you live in. Well, I suppose so. It's not a thing one is usually analytical about. Certainly laughter, yes.
Love and laughter, absolutely the most important things.
The sign that a school term in Bangor was definitely at an end was the receding view from the window of the Great Northern Railway train of Belfast's fog-swathed streets, the Murray's Meadow Mixture Tobacco Factory, Linfield Football Ground, the King's Hall at Balmoral, the linen mills and beach greens of Lambeg and Lisburn. Then the glittering granite spires of Armagh Cathedral on its green mound announced the return of the familiar landscape. Killalay, Tynan, Glasloch, Monaghan, lakes with moorhens, hawthorn brakes, apple trees, McEntee's farm, and all of a sudden, round the grassy hill, the two-storied thatched farmhouse would come into view. Great Aunt Zane leaning on the stile, waving to us as the train slowed down. 3 minutes later, we were in the little yellow brick station of Smithborough, with its fretwork canopy and wooden signal cabin. Everything bright and familiar and welcoming. Often, in a recurring dream, I am travelling in that train, but it is today, and I don't know that this journey is impossible, for there is no such thing now as the Great Northern Railway. I am like Alice, rowing her boat on a brook which becomes the dividing line between this memory and the next. I lean out of the window of the train to wave as once again we approach Eldron Cottage, half hidden in its wreath of beech leaves, horse chestnut blossom, and lilac. Instead of Great Aunt Zane, I see myself, aged 8, standing on the stile, waving back. But this cannot be, for the track is overgrown with blackberries and hazels, and the yellow brick station is no more.
Winter love. To love when we are very old is to be not alone nor cold, to wander autumn's burning land, hand in an arthritic hand. No longer lie, the foot may pass, avoiding long, inviting grass. Where once we soared, our flight is low, and reconciled to what we know. The past is long, the future short. The bluebird of our love is caught, caught in warmth of touch and look, two grey heads bending to one book.